This is Contra Zoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. Every once in a while, I like to have a chat with friends of the show. Not about a specific movie or topic, but just to get to know them and their tastes a bit better. I call these bonus episodes Better Know a Contributor. In the past, we've done them with co-host Rachel Ho and friends Callum McNabb, Sammy Felchenfeld, and Stephanie Pryor. And of course, one on myself as well. On today's edition of the special, we have Jeff Bulmer, who was last heard on episode 186, 2022 Oscars, Coda Pizza of Westside Belfast, and is one half of the Classic Movies Live, the pre-recorded show where you talk about potential future classics. I've been a guest on Classic Movie Live a few times, and I always enjoy coming on. Your latest long-form series is one based around the filmography of Anna Kendrick called Kicking It with Kendrick. I've especially enjoyed the series for the great guests that you and Pierre have been bringing on. I learned so much from the musical episodes with Ben where you talked about Into the Woods in the last 5 years. I also really like the breakdown of rom-coms that you had with Rachel on the Mr. Right show. But you also review new movies every week too. So welcome back to the show, Jeff, and to your first solo appearance. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I love with that series. I wanted to try and shake up our normal formula by inviting guests, and like the musicals episode. I mean, you shouted out a lot, and that is probably the one where like bringing in guests worked as we've had a lot of good guests, but I think that episode is like where that worked the best that as intended. Cause like my intention was always to bring in some expert on a related topic. And we could not have gotten a better expert for musical theater than Ben.
Yeah, it was incredibly scholarly. Like musicals are, it's a part of my area. If you listen to last week's episode, I talked about how I'm not great at horror movies. Musicals, I also don't have a big interest in. I like some of them, I don't like some of them, but I don't really search out them. So it's a big blind spot. Mm-hmm. And I went into the first episode. I can't remember which one. Was Into the Woods the first one that you did of the two?
I believe it was Into the Woods first and then the last 5 years.
Okay, yeah. So my memory's right. So I went to this being like, oh, I hated Into the Woods. I really didn't like that movie. It was so annoying, but I'm really liking this series. So I'll listen to it anyways. So I listened to it. And the amount of knowledge and backstory that Ben was able to bring in and sort of completely set the table of, hey, this is what this is all based on. This is how it was originally performed. This is what they wanted to do with the movie. This is what they had to do with the movie. This is how it was received and all that sort of stuff. It just sort of blew my mind completely that Ben was able to have all of this information and explain it in a way that sounded like the best podcast sound. When you put them on, you're like, wow, I learned something new today. And so when you said afterwards, hey, do you want to come on for the next 5 years episode? And he's like, sure. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to listen to it. I think I listened to it right away afterwards. And it was the exact same thing where I didn't know, I had only heard of this movie. I didn't know anything about it. I'd only heard of it. And he gives the entire history of Stephen Sondheim and everything and all that sort of stuff. It's just like, oh my God, like it just blew my mind, that episode.
Mm-hmm. When we usually have the video on while we're recording, for both of those episodes, he had like books that he was showing us too. Like it was all sourced and worked out. And like it's literally what he went to school for. He is actually a scholar on this stuff.
Yeah, it's at the point where like I've been looking through, especially because we do the recurring series that we do here is the A24 retrospective, and they haven't done a musical, but if A24 ever does do a musical, he's the first person I'm getting his contact information from you for, because I need to have him on this show.
Oh man. So, I mean, first off, I hope, I can't speak for him, but I hope he would love that. And I personally would love to hear that.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I like how you and I have our shows have started to have a bit of crossover with some different people as well that we're both podcast friends with. I feel like we've got a nice little community going.
I don't know exactly when this episode is going to come out. That the one we're recording right now, but I believe that our next episode, the one that comes out right after this one is going to go up, has our mutual friend Callum McNabb on it.
Yeah,
which was
I'm
also
super
a really
excited.
fun episode.
What was it for your Kicking It with Kendrick series?
Yes, it was. We talked about the movie The Day Shall Come.
Oh, right. I remember you guys talking about that on Twitter. I looked it up. I never heard of it before. Is it a horror movie?
No.
Okay.
It's I actually like when I reached out to Callum runs a horror movie podcast, but when I reached out to Callum, I said, I think we have the only one or two horror movies kind of already booked, but we can move things around if you want to come on for that. And he's like, no need. I want to come on for either Table 19 or The Day Shall Come. And I'm like, all right, we'll just do that then.
He's also such a fascinating character. I think he's so smart. And I talked about my aversion to horror, listening to his show Scaretraducing, which he's been a guest on numerous times. I always walk away having learned something new when I listen to his shows, which is really all you can ask for a good podcast, is that you learn something new when you're mildly entertained for, half an hour to an hour.
Yeah. So anyway, everyone who's listening, go and check out all those cool podcasts and mine.
Yes, of course. Classic Movies Live. So yeah, it's just you today. Maybe we'll get Pierre on another time for him to answer these questions as well. But for those unaware of the format, I have the same 10 movie-related questions that I ask each guest just to hear what they have to say. So let's get into this. The very first question I have for you, which is, a little patting myself on the back a bit, but how many episodes have you been on of Contra Zoom Pod, and do you have a favorite of those appearances?
So I can't remember if you already said this, but I've been on 3, 2 with Pierre, 1 alone. Our first one was we came on to talk about Judas and the Black Messiah and the movie Mank. We also came on, this was a really cool one that just happened to work out. We managed to sort of do a crossover episode where one of you guys' episodes in your A24 retrospective actually nicely fits into our Kicking It with Kendrick series, because we talked about the movie Life After Beth, which features Anna Kendrick in a almost non-existent but technically their role. And then the last one I came on alone for, to talk about Coda, Licorice Pizza, West Side Story, and Belfast, which was a lot, but you're very good at handling several movies in one episode, which we do not typically do. So it's very different for me to do that. But that went really well. I really liked that one. I think when I come on to these episodes, I really try when I can to make each appearance special in its own way, if I can, because, if I'm a guest on something, I kind of want people to remember me so that they'll come and listen to my show too. I hope that I have been able to do that. And I definitely can think of individual moments from every one of those episodes that I really liked a lot and think about a lot. But I would have to say probably my favorite, if I had to pick one, is the very first episode we were on, where we talked about Judas and the Black Messiah and Mank. I didn't really know what I was doing yet on a guest episode, so I was kind of winging it, but I had some very strong opinions on things, and I think back on those a lot. I know it's come up quite a few times on your podcast, and it's come up a little bit on mine. And just in between, with mutual friends, I sort of got a little bit infamous for my rant about the Best Original Song Oscar that in that episode. But also, when I think back on it, just sort of working through, trying to play devil's advocate for why Mank should actually be a real contender for makeup and hair, got me thinking about how makeup has to work in black and white movies, which is just something that I hadn't really thought about too much before that. So I think back on that a lot as well. And also I just really hated Mank. So it was really nice to be able to vent about Mank again after our 2-hour-long Citizen Kane episode we'd done before that.
Yeah, I'll sort of peel back the curtains a little bit on the 3 episodes that you've been on. I'll go in order, I guess. Obviously, the first episode that you came on, the Judas and the Black Messiah and the Mank one. Yeah, it is. I would consider it part of the infamous Contra Zoom lore of what I I guess I will dub it Jeff's rule, which is, or Jeff's law, I guess is a better term for it, of why the hell are original songs being nominated at the Oscars when they're just end credit songs, when in reality they should play an integral part in the plot of the movie, which music often does. But in the case, you know, you look at, and usually 4 out of the 5 nominees every year are just end credit songs. And then you have one that, if it's a musical, it comes during the movie or things like that. Every once in a while, you'll get a movie that has a song where it starts at the end and eventually transitions into being the end credit song. Or in the sake of something maybe like a James Bond movie, it is the intro song, which I feel also helps set up the movie and the themes. But when it's at the very end, it's usually just some big name celebrity being slapped on for some message song to recap the plot.
I definitely, like, I've heard contrary views to my own opinion. Like, some people talking about how they actually do like the end credit song because it can wrap up, like, a good end credit song will wrap up all the themes of the movie just sort of in a nice little package that plays over the credits. And that's true. A good end credit song will do that. I would argue that 4 out of 5 end credit songs are not good at doing that.
Yeah.
Like, I think I talked about it. I think I talked about it on the last episode I was on. King Richard's end credit song. I believe that the themes that are sung about by Beyonce in that song are directly counter to the movie King Richard.
Yeah, that's a fair thing. And I would say, to kind of add to that point, yeah, no shit. An ending song is supposed to nicely wrap up a movie in its themes. That's the entire purpose of music in general. So
yeah,
you're just, it's like congratulating you on just showing up for your job. It's like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. But yeah, moving on, sort of the other ones. I love that the crossover episode we did. I've never done anything else like that. It worked out so nicely for timing wise, both for your show and for my show. And it was also really fun because we did like a marathon recording session where it was basically like 4 hours straight. We were recording, just the four of us talking, which was a lot of fun. But it was basically just like, okay, block out my first half of the day because I'm just recording today.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we talked about, like, do we want to record it over separate days? And it's like, well, we don't want to use up 2 of everyone's days.
Yeah, we did talk about that, and that would have been just way more exhausting. And it was just like, you know, we're just going to do this. It's just funny, though, because both of our shows feature someone that lives in British Columbia and someone that lives in Ontario. So no matter what, there's going to be a 3-hour time difference for 2 of us.
Yep.
And then the last one, you talked about Coda, Licorice Pizza, West Side Story, and Belfast, how, you know, covering many movies. It is a bit of a balancing act because, you know, these are for my Oscar specials every year. We look at the best picture contenders, and so we break them up over the course of 3 to 4 shows, which means that you're talking about anywhere from 2 to 4 movies, depending on how scheduling works out between nomination announcement and the actual ceremony. I have to look at them all, and I basically break them down by nomination. So whatever movie has the most nominations will get paired up with whatever movie has the least nominations. And then you have the ones in the middle sort of thing. So I try to make it where, because we talk through every single nomination of the films that are nominated for Best Picture, I try to do about 20 nominations per episode. How that gets divvied up, it depends totally on what movies get nominated and how many things they get nominated for.
Right.
So it's a bit tricky. Sometimes, you know, things like you'd be like, oh, you know, we're spending 15 minutes on a movie. If we're doing a film festival wrap up, we'd be like, all right, we're going to talk about 5 movies. Each movie only gets about, you know, 10 minutes max sort of thing. Then it becomes a bit trickier because some movies you have more things to talk about or not. Whereas on yours, it's much simpler where, hey, for an hour, we're just talking about this one movie.
Yeah. Which is a lot easier to structure. Like, a lot of our episodes, sometimes I wish that we had the time to go through and like make episodes with a little more structure, research them a little more. But also what's nice about our show is I teach at a university, and Pierre up until recently was a student, and I don't know what he's currently doing, but like he literally just graduated. So like we're both working on student schedules. So if, you know, if we don't have time to do anything else, but we can still meet up on Saturday, you know, it's enough to have seen the movie. We don't necessarily, obviously the episodes that I like the best are the ones where we do a lot of prep work for them, but like we can still produce a good episode with very minimal prep because we're literally just talking about the movie we saw.
Yeah. I completely agree. You know, there's a times where you put like hours and hours worth of prep and you have everything, all your notes laid out in front of you. And some of them you just manage to, you magically work into just a great back and forth conversation. And sometimes those are the most fun episodes.
I think, I don't think it's technically up anymore. All of our episodes used to go up on SoundCloud. That SoundCloud went down. So I've been trying to upload them to Spotify, but I've, been slacking a bit the last month or two with uploading the old episodes to Spotify. It will hopefully go up this summer. I think my favorite episode that we've ever done on Classic Movies Live might be our Apocalypse Now episode. I watched Apocalypse Now. I watched 3 different versions of Apocalypse Now and the documentary in preparation for that. And I listened to Kenneth Branagh read the audiobook of Heart of Darkness. So like I was very prepared, and like that was a really good episode, but also that's not currently up.
Yeah. Well, if that one goes up, make sure you let me know and I'll have to listen to that for sure.
Yes, I will for sure.
And I would love it if one day in the future you and Pierre do a bit of an oral history of Classic Movies Live, because you've told me some bits and pieces over our time that we've known each other, and it's all very fascinating. I love to hear it all in one go.
I need to, I'm actually going to Kelowna, and I don't know if Pierre is currently still in Kelowna, but I need to meet up with him at some point here soon, because I'm thinking right now all of our episodes we're in like season 3, whatever that means. That's just however many episodes we want to make it before I decide we're in season 4. But like, I want the finale of season 3 to be exactly that, like an oral history, because, this is something I haven't really said on our show yet because it's never really come up. At the beginning of each of our shows, I say that this is Heatwave Radio's Classic Movies Live. Heatwave Radio, I'm pretty sure, no longer exists. And I want to talk about that because that's sort of a whole big deal that would be really nice to get some of the people. It would be less of an actual oral history of Classic Movies Live and more just an oral history of Heatwave Radio, which, I mean, I hope that's not too university politics for everybody, but like, I think it's important to have that chronicled somewhere. And that's what I would really like to do for a season finale.
I love that idea. And I think you would underestimate the amount of people that would find that extremely interesting, because some of these episodes where, you know, I like not to put down these episodes down, but I kind of do this as a bit of a filler, like, oh, my schedule isn't working out, I'm rushed, okay, let's do a bonus episode. And I get so much great feedback on these Better Know Contributor episodes because so much behind the scenes information comes out, and I find that so fascinating, and people really respond to that for some reason. So if you do that, I think you'll be very happy with how that turns out.
I just want to say on that note, I think my favorite episode of Contra Zoom, by the way, is your Better Know a Contributor on Yourself. That was a very good episode.
My very self-serving, let's do a backstory of the podcast one. Well,
I mean, I did say it earlier, like when I think I might have said it off air, but when I'm listening to a lot of your episodes, I'll often like, I mean, I would do this with any podcast, but I just listen to your podcast. Your podcast is one of my regular ones that I listen to all the time. So like, when I'm listening to a podcast episode and people ask each other questions, like in my head, I'm trying to also think of like, what would I answer for that question? And in your Better Know a Contributor episode, there were a lot of questions that you got asked that I thought I had interesting answers for. So not only did I like hearing your answers, but like it made me think a lot about, my own history with movies, and made me sort of put things into words that I wouldn't have probably done otherwise.
Well, I'll say one last thing about that, and then we'll kind of segue back into the questions. The reason why
Right.
that episode kind of stands out a little bit from the other Bear No contributors is because I came up with this script and the 10 questions and all that sort of stuff that I supplied to the guests like yourself. I have often talked about a lot of these answers in other shows. And so I don't know if anyone's a frequent listener. Like, you obviously say you are, which is amazing, and I'm so thankful that you do. But I don't know anyone else that, like, how many shows have they listened to? Do they listen to every single one? Obviously, so there has to be some continuity, but at the same time, I can repeat myself a little bit. And several of these questions, I felt like I had repeated myself enough times that it wouldn't be very interesting or exciting for me to just sort of talk about Oscar stuff that if you listen to every year at the Oscars, I usually end up going over that sort of stuff anyways, so it wouldn't be that interesting for me or for people that listen. So I gave Rachel the creative leeway to sort of give me some different questions. I said anything that like would revolve around you asking me to name a specific movie, I'd want to know that in advance because I'm not very good at like just coming up with titles on the fly. So she did that. She gave me a few new questions specifically related to movies, and then the rest of them were general, like, tell me a bit about the backstories, that sort of stuff, which I was able to obviously go off of memory. So that's why that episode's a bit structured a bit differently than these usual ones. But either way, I was still very happy with the way it came out. And I'm so happy that you liked it as well, and hope that it was an entertaining one. I remember being very sick that day. I think I was quite hungover, and so it was a real struggle to get through.
Well, it was a great episode. So,
well, thank you.
I didn't even notice that you were hungover, so
well,
all worked out.
I appreciate that. I'm going to do now a terrible segue. You had set it up earlier, but now I'm going to bring it all back. And this is with a bit of a new question. What made you fall in love with movies, Jeff?
So, the last most of the times that I've been on your podcast, it's been to talk about Oscars and the Oscars and like death racing the Oscars. So, the reason I bring that up is to say I'm a bit of a completionist. Like when it comes to the Oscars, I try and watch every movie that's nominated. When I got into comics a couple of years ago, I read every comic that I could get my hands on, like literally every one. And I went out of my way to find even more so that I could just like read all of them. And I got burned out and I haven't read comics in years. And like when I tried getting into movies early on, I wanted to watch every movie. And that was like an achievable goal at the time because specifically like when I decided that I wanted to like start really getting into movies, I was probably like 8 or 9 and I lived in Seward, Nebraska. And we have in Seward, there's like one small local theater that is it's owned by Julie. I don't remember her last name, unfortunately. Weishart, I think. Anyway, shout outs to Julie. Yeah, shout outs to Julie at the Rivoli. But they would get like they didn't get a lot of movies because it's like a local theater. But Julie was really good at trying to get like as much as she could and as much new stuff as she could. Like nowadays, if there's ever a blockbuster, it's at the Rivoli. But like she was a film buff herself, so she'd go out of her way to like try and get whatever she could and just try and get as many movies and always have something new playing. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and see everything that plays at the Rivoli, which lasted for a bit. But I remember that one day, there was one day that it was Friday. The movie had just come to the theaters, and I was like, I gotta go see this. But we're going to some other party in town, and like I would have to leave early, and like I couldn't leave early, and I was really sad that day, and like because I couldn't go and see 13 Going on 30, which is like not a movie that I nowadays is definitely not a movie I would have sought out. But I'm like at that time I was like I need to see every movie, and so. 13 Going on 30 is the one that I really remember where it's like, it's just not going to be feasible to see every movie. And then a couple of months later, I went and still trying to do this, like going to the movies every week. I went and saw the Adam Sandler movie Spanglish. And I hated that movie so much that I came out of it like, you know what? I don't think I do have to see every movie. I think I just have to see the ones that are good. And so my answer to your question is the 1-2 punch of 13 going on 30 and Spanglish is what made me like really crystallize in my mind sort of start thinking in my mind about what are good movies, what are movies that I like. I want to actually be interested in the movies that I watch, because when I'm talking about like being a completionist, I'm sure you get this yourself a little bit when you're trying to death race the Oscars. Sometimes it feels like you're just going through a checklist. Mm-hmm. And when I started feeling that way about movies, I was like, and became conscious of it, I'm like, I don't want to be going through a checklist. I want to see movies because I like movies, but I need to like figure out what I like about movies, because if I go and see Spanglish, if I have to see Spanglish on the first day, if I mentally am in that place where I need to go and see Spanglish on the first day it's out, that's a bad place to be in. I don't want to be there.
That is a terrific story, and I am very glad that you said that you had a story to tell. So that worked out really well. And yeah, I have to completely agree with you, because I guess we're sort of similar in the same way that we're both a part of the Oscar death racing community, which if you listen to the show, you know what that is. But it sometimes can feel being like, I just got to highlight this last, best hair and makeup Oscar, so that way I can complete this category. And you're like, what am I doing? Or like best original song, it's only for the end credit song that we do, as Paulo calls it, the breakthrough award. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that, where sometimes you can feel like you're going a bit neurotic because you're so obsessed with completing it. And so I totally get where you're coming from. And I also sort of feel like when you're first getting into movies, you look at it and be like, oh yeah, I can see all the movies. There's not that many. And you're watching them and you're like, yeah, I powered through, AFI's top 100 list, or, I've seen the IMDb top 250 or whatever it is. And then as soon as you start going down those rabbit holes, you realize that there's more and more and more you haven't seen, because obviously there's new stuff coming out all the time, but you're realizing that certain countries you've never even heard of before suddenly have this rich film history, and you're like, well, I need to learn all about that, and you're getting into that. And then you start like conversing with other film people, and you like will feel inadequate about yourself. You're like, oh man, I haven't seen, this movie from that country. I'm such a movie noob. I don't know anything about it. And then of course you like talk to a regular person and you're like, oh yeah, I just watched this movie. And in your mind, it's like, everyone knows this movie. And they're like, I've literally don't know anything about this. Never heard of it. Never seen it. Don't know what the poster is. Don't know the actor. Don't know the director. Don't know anything. Sort of like puts you in check a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, when you start getting that feeling of inadequacy because you haven't seen every single thing, it's like, well, the checklist that you're trying to work down it's infinite. You will never see every single movie. So like, certainly there's definitely, when I talk to people and I don't know the history of movies in Thailand, sure, I'm going to feel a little inadequate there, but like ultimately I don't need to see every movie. I just need to see the ones that are good and like figure out why I'm watching movies in the first place. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's just like that way to keep yourself in check a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Spanglish did to me.
I love that. Now, you talked about two movies that either weren't for you or you actively disliked. Let's, bring it a little bit more positive and talk about what is your favorite movie of all time?
Well, I mean, first off, I do just want to clarify, I didn't hate 13 going on 30. It was not my kind of movie, but I didn't dislike it. Spanglish, I hated. But anyway, I think that like you and also guests have said this plenty of times before. Favorite movie of all time is a little bit of a difficult question, or not so much a difficult question, because I think about this a lot, but it's one that I like don't love getting a lot of times because it's so hard to pick. But also like, because I know that favorite movie is going to be like, when people ask you anything about movies, like the first time they hear that you like movies, they're going to be like, oh, what's your favorite? So it's like, I have an answer prepared. It's a bit of a cop-out answer because I literally can't pick one. I have a stable of 3 movies that I like always have as ready to go for this question.
I love it. So, give it to me. I normally have 5 at the ready, so 3 works great.
So I have Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi one, Requiem for a Dream with Jared Leto and Ellen Burstyn, and Redline, which is an anime movie that came out in, I think, 2006. I haven't watched Spider-Man and Requiem for a Dream in probably a little over a year, but these are all three movies that I do rewatch a lot. Clearly not recently, but they're three movies that I rewatch a lot, and every time I rewatch them, I'm like, yes, that is still my favorite movie. Because I'll go through this every now and then and be like, you know, if I want to say that Requiem for a Dream is my favorite movie, can I still say that this many years later? And I still can. Mm-hmm. Like the last time I saw it, it was still as good as I remembered it, possibly better. Same with Spider-Man 2. And then Redline is the movie that I've seen most recently of those three. And like every time I watch it, I like it more. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is, man, it's such a blast. It's probably the best looking movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of it, and I'm trying to look it up, and there's so many movies called Redline that I can't find it.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Redline now because it makes one of my later answers on this list that you sent me much easier because then I don't have to talk about Redline. So Redline is it's directed by Takeshi Koike, and I can actually send you a sound clip where they literally just say directed by Takeshi Koike because it's like that's one of the only English parts of the whole. Well, most of the soundtrack's in English, but most of it's nonsense. But like that's part of the soundtrack that they actually say that in the beginning. Directed by Takeshi Koike. But anyway, Redline it's an animated movie that took about 7 years to make because if you finally do find pictures of it, it's like the slickest looking movie I've ever seen. And yet every single frame of it is hand painted. Like it looks better. It looks better and almost more digital than most current digital movies. And yet all of it is like analog. They painted every single thing of it. And it is such an active movie. Every single frame of that movie, there's like 50 things happening on screen, but it never becomes like, it's enough where like there's always something more you can get out of the scene, but it's never overwhelming. At least not like overwhelming to the point where you stop being able to follow the movie. Because it's a very high energy movie. It's basically Wacky Races, but as an anime. Because the whole point of the movie is you have it's a space race on like a literal race of cars on a planet in space where all of the drivers are just like big characters, like in Wacky Races, like. You know, even the couple of racers that are barely in the movie have fully developed personalities. They have like intro scenes. They have an entire backstory. And so it's just like all of these weird characters in a race. And the whole movie is just the race. And it is, and it's got like the best soundtrack I've ever heard. It's one of the best looking movies I've ever seen. And it is basically perfectly directed. Because like I said, there's always more to discover. And like not only is there always more to discover, every frame has so much going on in it, but never to the point where you get exhausted just looking at it. Like at the end of the movie, I always feel like I always feel like my heart just like, I always feel like my heart is still pumping like 400 beats per minute because it's just that high adrenaline. But throughout the whole movie, I never shut down because there's too much going on. It hits that balance perfectly. It's like right on the line. And Yellow Line, which is the intro song to that movie, which is like 10 minutes long, is my favorite song I have ever heard in a movie.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I looked it up, and you can watch it for free in Canada on Tubi or on Plex if you have that server, and they stream movies there for free as well. So, or you can rent it from Apple TV.
I would, if I can make a suggestion to anyone hearing this who wants to watch Redline, I would definitely recommend renting it or watching it in some way, like probably renting. I just know that Tubi has ads. I would not recommend watching that movie with ads because once it starts, it doesn't stop. And having like any stops for commercials would be a real downer. It wouldn't ruin the movie. It would just be like it would just be annoying, and like you shouldn't be annoyed while watching that movie.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. I like it. I'm definitely intrigued by that. But moving on to the next question, talking about you try to watch every movie that came through your town. What would be a movie that you are embarrassed to say that you've never seen?
Potentially embarrassingly, I have a lot of blind spots. Actually, this is going to come up in an upcoming question here, but there's a lot of movies that like everyone's seen that I just never have, and the movie that I'm going to say for this question is Jaws. Somehow, I have never seen Jaws. I don't know how, but like it's just never happened.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I adore that movie. I've talked about my love of it several times on this show, so it would come as no surprise for there. But yeah, I'm a big fan of it, and yeah, it sucks because every time you reluctantly admit, oh yeah, I've never seen it, the response from the person is, oh well, you got to watch it. So I'm gonna avoid doing that, even though I will say it's a very great film.
Well, that and Jurassic Park are two movies I got to watch here soon.
Wow.
I've seen. I mentioned it on the last episode that released. I've seen all three of the new Jurassic World movies, all of which I have disliked. But like, I've seen most of the rest of the other movies, like most of the rest of the movies, like the first trilogy. But I don't actually remember if I've sat through one front to back and seen the whole thing. I know that I have seen probably the entirety of Jurassic Park in pieces, like from watching it on TV when it would come on, or from walking in on other people watching it. But I've never actually sat down and watched the whole thing. And I would like to, because the bits and pieces that I've seen have convinced me that it is probably one of the greatest movies of all time. I just haven't actually seen it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies where you've probably watched it through osmosis because you'll see clips of it all the time at different award shows or examples on YouTube videos of like great use of suspense and what have you. And just catching it on TV here and there, it wouldn't surprise me if you probably have seen, 80, 90% of the movie, just not in one chunk. I could probably think of a bunch of movies that throughout my life I had been like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now moving on to, once again, talking more positively about things. Who is your favorite director?
Well, based on the last answer, it's definitely not Steven Spielberg. That's not true. I do love Steven Spielberg. I just haven't seen nearly all of his movies.
You just haven't seen his two biggest and best films. Yeah,
I guess. So, I wrote down for this one, but this is another question that's really hard for me to answer because while I do try to have an answer ready for a question like "What's your favorite movie?" I don't really care that much about having like a favorite. I don't actually care that much about having a favorite movie or a favorite director or a favorite actor, and like I do have those things probably, but I don't like think about it a lot. So I actually don't know I don't know if the answer that I'm going to give for this question is definitive. Like, this could probably change in a couple of weeks because I just don't think about this enough. This is the first time that I've had to like actually put this question into my head in words and try and get something out. And more than that, there's a lot of actors and directors that I follow basically religiously anyway, but I would struggle to say that they're my favorite. For example, Steven Spielberg. Anytime I see that Steven Spielberg has a new movie coming out, I will watch that movie. It's hard for me to say that he's my favorite, though, because clearly I have so many like blind spots within his filmography. So when I'm thinking about this, I would have to say that at the moment, I think I can sort of like tie down one specific director as my favorite, or like pair of directors, actually. And it may be, I may be a little, this may be a little bit unreliable because I recently saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it's like my favorite movie of the year, and it is inching its way towards my list of favorite movies of all time. So I'm going to go with Daniels here because, one, I actually have seen all of their feature-length movies. And I find that they're able to give like that same kind of high energy sense of wonder that like a Marvel movie always goes for, or like a big budget superhero movie in general will always try and do. But like maybe no, but they're also able to mix it with like the more like the substance that a lot of indie movies have. And I find that like when I watch indie movies, like if I watch just indie movies, there's lots that I like, but there's very few that like are indie movies but feel like blockbusters. And with blockbusters, there's like very few blockbusters that I watch that like feel as deep as a lot of the indie movies that I've seen. And I think that Daniels are almost consistently able to hit that exact balance where their movies feel as much of a spectacle as something much bigger like an Iron Man or a Spider-Man, while also having as much depth as something like a Nomadland. Nomadland is a weird comparison here, but like they're also able, there's just a lot going on both visually and like, I guess emotionally. Everything Everywhere All at Once, I'm pretty sure that me and my mom both cried during that movie. Like there's so much to digest in that. And I know you've talked about, you've mentioned me and the death of Dick Long in the same sentence on this podcast before. That movie, I've only seen it once. I got to rewatch it, but that movie struck such a chord with me because I grew up in the Midwest in the States, so like I'm very partial to movies about the Midwest that I guess, for lack of a better term, get it right. And The Death of Dick Long is like one of the best movies about the Midwest that I've seen that isn't Cars. Like Cars is really good in that respect, but like I don't like Cars as much as I feel like I should like Cars for that reason. But The Death of Dick Long like gets everything right. It's really funny. It's like really good. And it has Nickelback like used well, which is awesome. So Daniels. I'm going to say Daniels. And with the caveat that may change even at a moment's notice, but they're always going to be up there.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's a really unique pick. I feel for me, they don't have enough of a filmography for me to like fully be on board and be like, yeah, they're my favorite. But of the two movies of theirs I've seen, Swiss Army Man and Everything Everywhere, I've loved them both. And so that puts them in the conversation of if they have a new movie coming out, I'm definitely seeing it category.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I also did sort of say, and I would stand by it, that like, that's right now.
Yes.
If Daniels released 4 movies tomorrow, I would be in the theater all day tomorrow because I love them right now. And like, I'm not gonna not love them, but exactly the same thing as you just said. Like, they don't really have enough of a filmography where it feels right calling them my favorite directors. But I don't know. This is a weird question, so I'm gonna go with a weird answer.
Okay. Well, I like it. Now, the next question is one I believe that you were alluding to earlier with some blind spots, but so it's kind of a two-parter, but we'll start with the first part. What was your favorite Best Picture winner?
Yeah, so this is one where I definitely have a lot of blind spots. There's actually an easy answer for this because it's Parasite. Parasite is one of my favorite movies. It is definitely my favorite Best Picture winner. And but when I'm thinking of how to answer the question of favorite Best Picture winner, I haven't seen enough. I don't think I've seen enough Best Picture winners where I feel comfortable grading that specifically on like just compare which is my favorite movie that was also a winner of a Best Picture winner. Now, in the case of Parasite, that's it anyway. But I tried to think more of this question, like, because over the last couple of years, I've gotten more into the race and like the lead up to Best Picture. So not only is Parasite my favorite Best Picture winner because it won Best Picture and is a movie I liked, I also like when I'm thinking of favorite Best Picture winner, I'm thinking of like what happened. What was that like the night that I watched Parasite win Best Picture? Like what was going through my head? What was like the whole experience like? And so that's how I chose to answer this question. When Parasite won Best Director, I was actually hosting an Oscars party at the student pub, and I was getting very drunk by this point. But when it won Best Director, I literally fell out of my seat and made a mess with the beer I was holding because, like, I was so shocked, but also I only had three of the legs of the chair were on the ground, and one of them was like hovering over the ground because it was on a tiny little elevated stage and there wasn't enough room. So like that was when the chair gave out, was literally when Parasite won Best Director. And but also when Parasite won Best Director, that was the moment where I'm like, Parasite could win Best Picture. And then when it actually did win Best Picture, I ran around the whole bar. I was like cheering. People probably weren't too enthused with me, but there was a lot of cheering going on in that bar. People did like that. Anyway, it was like a whole big experience. And like, it was just like such a fun moment. So when I'm thinking of favorite Best Picture winner and least favorite Best Picture winner, which is the next question, I'm trying to think of like, what was it like to be there when that Best Picture win happened?
Totally. I agree with what you're saying. And that's a great story. And it ties in nicely to a good personal memory for you. So I'm glad that you were able to answer the question in a way that was still sufficient and feels like you're answering the question to the best of your ability, because I get it. There's a little over 90 movies that have won Best Picture. You know, a lot of them get derided right after they win of how the hell did this movie win Best Picture? So it doesn't really stay in the sort of the cultural zeitgeist anymore of caring about it. Like no one cares about Driving Miss Daisy anymore. When you're trying to go back and fill in your blind spots, you're not like, oh man, I got to see Driving Miss Daisy. It won Best Picture. It's like, ooh, yeah, that one Best Picture. I'll skip it if I can, sort of thing. So I totally get where you're coming from. Unless you're crazy like me and force yourself to watch every single Best Picture winner.
I mean, eventually I am going to go through that checklist. I just haven't made it yet.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to another podcast, Once Upon a Time at the Oscars, who are going through every nominated Best Picture, which is an insane thought. Yeah.
I love it, though. I love that concept, and I haven't listened to all of their episodes, but the ones I have been very good. So please go listen to them as well.
Yeah, they're really great. I really like them. I did an ad swap with them, so you've probably heard their commercial before. And I would love to get. Oh wait, no, they did come on for one show, one of the Oscar specials. Kyle and Mary Lee. Wow, I can't believe I'm forgetting that they actually came on.
The Drive My Car episode.
Yes, you're right. The Drive My Car episode. Wow. Thank you for remembering my own show better than I know, Jeff. Oh, boy. But yes, Kyle and Mary Lee are excellent. They have a very terrific show. But now to the second part of this question that I'm sure is going to be just as interesting of an answer is, what is your least favorite Best Picture winner? It's actually not as interesting of an answer because I can't think of any movie that's like won Best Picture where I was physically angry about it or where I was like going off or anything. It's just like, you know, when, at least so far in my experience, when a movie wins Best Picture that I really, really liked, that's awesome. When a movie doesn't win, when a movie wins Best Picture that I didn't like, so far I haven't had like a visceral reaction to that yet. It's just been like, oh, that's disappointing. And that's the case with Green Book. So like, it's Green Book. When I watched the Oscars that where Green Book won, I watched that at home, and Green Book won, and that was fine. I mean, it wasn't Black Klansman, which was my favorite like nominee and the one I was super cheering for. But like when Green Book won, I remember I'd seen it, and at the time I didn't really hate it. I've since gone back and watched it, and my opinion of it has soured more. But even then, like, it's just not a good movie. It's not like, I don't hate it as much as some people do. And it's just sort of a disappointing win. In kind of the same wheelhouse, I guess How Green Was My Valley, but clearly I wasn't at those Oscars. But it's just that, like, when I look through the couple of movies I've seen from that year that were also up for Best Picture, Citizen Kane and The Maltese Falcon are such huge classics that it's just weird to me that How Green Was My Valley won. And I've watched it, and again, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not like, it's not Citizen Kane.
And so that's definitely the kind of thing where I think, like, you know, the Oscars get it wrong sometimes because the Oscars aren't trying to pick enduring classics that we're going to remember in 70 years, or at least they're not picking those. They're picking what was the best movie at the time. And you really get, that's why, like, looking back at Oscars, and especially what like Kyle and Mary Lee are doing, looking back at all the nominations, is really interesting because you get sort of an idea of what tastes are like at the time. Because like, I think in 50 years, probably no one's even going to remember how infuriating it was when Green Book won. Like, I was just a little disappointed. A lot of people hated that so much. That's probably not going to be that big of an issue in 50 years. Green Book just isn't going to be a movie that endures that long, I don't think. And like, maybe people will look back on that year and be like, wow, how did Black Klansman not win? That's an actual classic now. I don't know if that's the case, but like, you know, it's, the Oscars get it wrong sometimes when they're trying to pick classics.
Yeah, I agree with both of the movies you sort of pick there and all your rationale. Anytime someone says to me that they love Green Book, it always sort of makes me question their movie taste a little bit, where I'm like, I get it. I probably hate it more than some people do. The performances are really solid. It's just, there's so many script issues for me that it's hard to get over that. But anytime someone's like, oh yeah, I loved Green Book, I'm just like, really? But why? Like that famous like Ryan Reynolds gif of him being like, but why, when he's in Van Wilder or whatever that was, or Harold and Kumar. I can't remember what it was. But it's just like, but why? Why do you love that movie? And I'm glad you shouted out How Green Was My Valley, because I do actively really hate that movie. That movie is just so ridiculous for me. It was near the bottom of my rankings of when I ranked all the Best Picture winners.
Oh, wow. I just thought it was like, I don't know. I think that How Green Was My Valley was probably the perfect movie for Oscar voters at the time. Because if I think back to around that time, and more specifically a little later, like a little bit later than that was the era of like grand epics in movies that like just span like an entire lifetime, and you get the whole history of the town. And that's what How Green Was My Valley was. And like, it's just so boring. Like, there's not that much interesting about it. It's just, it's a big grand story, but it's a big grand story about what, like a kid in a coal mining town. Like, who cares?
Yes. Its boringness is mostly what offended me.
Yeah.
All right. Here's one that I'm very curious to hear about, because I know you'll sometimes watch some truly god-awful movies for no reason at all. But, what was the last movie you walked out of or turned off?
I am pretty good at not walking out of or turning off movies. Like, if I turn something on, I'm going to commit to it. And so I actually can't think of an answer that's in the spirit of this question. Like, there haven't been any movies that I can think of where I've like actively walked out of them. I've always finished the movie. Or there have probably been movies that I've turned off and never turned back on, but I actually can't remember them, because the main reason that I'll turn off a movie like that is because I am incredibly bored. And I think the most recent movie that this happened with is also one that I fully intend on finishing. I started it when I should have been working, and I was like 5 minutes in, and I'm like, no, I need to be working actually. So I turned it off and I didn't go back to it. It was Deep Water with Ben Affleck and Ana de Armas. I've heard it's really bad, but it has Tracy Letts in it, and it sounds really entertainingly bad. So I do plan on finishing it. I just haven't gotten around to it because it's also 2 hours long. And like, I mean, you've said I sit through a lot of bad movies. You're right. It's just like, do I want to devote 2 hours of my life to a movie that I know I will not enjoy earnestly? Like, I might ironically enjoy it. It might be funny bad, but I know it's not going to be good. And like, maybe I'll be surprised and I actually didn't know and it was good, but like, I'm expecting to hate it. It's hard for me to find that 2 hours to go back to it.
I agree with you. And that was one that I was so curious about. And when it dropped, I was like, oh yeah, I got to set some time aside to watch this movie. And then just like the reviews kept pouring in about how much of a hot mess it was. Like it's one of those like, how the hell did this movie get made type of deals.
Right.
So I probably won't end up going back to ever watching it, but hopefully you do, and you can figure out just how bad this movie is.
Well, what I will mention is that Deep Water is the second adaptation of the Patricia Highsmith novel Deep Water. So you could actually do a make-remake on it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, when was the original one?
I think it's a French movie, also called Deep Water, but like Deep Water in French.
Yeah, I probably won't end up doing a make-remake on it just because of the fact that this movie kind of came and gone, and neither of them are well-known enough. I have to be a bit picky with the ones I choose for the make-remake series, because if I choose a bad pairing, just no one listens to it, which is a shame.
Yeah, for sure.
So it either has to be super topical, or it has to be like a well-regarded classic.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just looking at what it was. In 1981, Michel Deville made a movie called Eau Profonde, which is Deep Water in French. That was the first adaptation of this. I don't know if either of them is good, because I haven't seen either of them. And, like, neither of them is topical, so by all means, like, I might just use that idea at some point.
Do it. I give you full permission to steal it.
All right, thank you.
All right, moving on. What is an underrated movie that you think more people need to see?
So this is where I was saying I was going to talk about Redline if I didn't talk about it earlier. So I don't have to talk about Redline, which is good because I actually wrote down 3. So I'm going to talk about the first one that I wrote down, which is Bad Times at the El Royale. I don't know what the critical reception to this one was, but I know that like no one saw it. I remember I was really excited for it because it looked like a stylish Quentin Tarantino-esque movie, and I think it was directed by Drew Goddard. I'd have to check.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it was.
Okay, yeah, directed by Drew Goddard. So I was like, that's interesting. I didn't know he did movies. And then it looked like a stylish, like, Quentin Tarantino-esque neo-noir. And I was blown away by it. I was so happy with that movie. It's a movie about several characters who wind up in this in the El Royale, which is a basically out of business motel. Like, clearly they didn't realize it was out of business because they all wind up there because they need a place to stay. But like, it hasn't had guests in years. And the only person that's still there is like a really finicky little kid who turns out to actually be a war vet. But like, he's not even sure what he's doing there. And the movie, as the central mystery of the movie unravels, it's like, I actually can't remember exactly what the central mystery is because it goes in so many directions and ends up being like a Manson family thing, which has my favorite part of the movie, which is Chris Hemsworth actually as a villain, which I have never seen him in a villain role before or since. And he knocks it out of the park so hard in this movie because like, he's super charismatic. And so you understand why people would follow him, but he's extremely creepy. He's like basically a horror villain when he actually shows up. And I think it's put together so perfectly that in the first act, even though Chris Hemsworth never shows up on screen, you always feel his character's presence, and he's always like this looming danger alongside a bunch of other things that probably should be looming dangers. Because I think there's like a CIA plot involved, and 1 or 2 of the people that are there are actually spies, and one person is just like on her way, like she's on her way to do a concert, but like as the night goes on, it starts to look less and less likely that she'll even survive the night. So there's so much going on. And yet throughout this first act, the most terrifying thing is that eventually we're going to see this cult leader who's played by Chris Hemsworth. And when he actually comes in, he's such a good villain that like, I'm honestly sad I've never seen Chris Hemsworth in a villain role since, but like maybe he just needed the one. But if anyone who hasn't seen it, I recommend it for Chris Hemsworth's performance alone. The rest of the movie is also really good, but he is terrifying. It's one of the like most terrifying villains in recent memory I can think of.
Yeah, I agree with you there. That's such an interesting movie because I remember when it came out, I was super excited for it because the cast looked amazing. The trailer was really put together, and usually once you watch enough movie trailers and enough movies, you can kind of sort of glean, is this movie actually going to be good, or is it just a good trailer? And I was
you can tell when the trailer's lying to you.
Yes, exactly. And so I was very intrigued by it. And then when it came out, it actually was getting pretty bad reviews overall. The word of mouth of it was pretty bad. Critics were like, oh, it's bloated, it's confusing, it doesn't know what it wants to be, all this sort of stuff. I was like, oh man, that's really disappointing. I was so excited for it. So I forgot about it, didn't watch it. And then like a year or two later, my wife and I were like, let's try to find some like neo-noirs or like some crime movies or, you know, some modern thrillers and things like that. We're like, all right, yeah, let's do that. So we're Googling different lists, and Bad Times at the El Royale came up, and we're like, do we want to give this a shot? We were kind of interested back in the day. Just give it a shot. And like you said, it just sort of blew me away. Drew Goddard is most famous for directing Cabin in the Woods before this, and sort of similar movies that were not really appreciated in their time, but afterwards people were able to go back and be like, holy crap, what was this? How come this wasn't a bigger deal? This should have been like the number one movie of like the month or whatever at the box office. Everyone should have been going to see this. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of is forgotten. And like, yeah, the amount of times that like I tell people about Bad Times at the El Royale, and they're like, sorry, what are you saying? What's at the the what? And you have to like explain it slowly what the title is. The incredibly stacked cast it has, the fact that it is a thriller, but it's also kind of funny and it's kind of sad. It's got some really great music in it and all this sort of stuff that like makes it really hard to market a movie when you've got like all these clashing genres. But like as a movie lover, you're like, who cares? I don't care if it's a comedy and a thriller. You can be both things at once and I'll enjoy it.
I mean, it might be partially because I also listen to As It Happens on occasion on CBC. But that movie starts with the song 25 Miles to Go, which still gets stuck in my head like all the time. It's also, that's the As It Happens theme for people that listen to CBC is a version of 25 Miles to Go.
Yeah, so definitely more people should check it out. Thanks for suggesting that. I co-sign that. But, you know, you're already infamous for having Jeff's Law. I very much need to know what is an unnecessary or necessary hot take you have about a movie.
Oh man, I was really thinking about this because I'm not sure. I'm trying to think like, is there any specific movie that I just want to like tell people is actually not good? And I don't know. I think I'm gonna basically use this as a soapbox for something that's been bothering me today, which is probably not something I need to tell any of your audience. I'm sure all of your audience is probably already on my side on this, but I think it's very, very silly to talk about. I think the discourse around like superhero movie ratings is very silly. When I say superhero movie ratings, I don't just mean superhero movies. I think that's where it comes up the most, but I'm talking specifically about the MPAA ratings of movies, like rated R, rated T, rated NC-17, whatever those are. It came up today with the movie Blonde. Most of the discourse around the movie Blonde that I've seen hasn't been about the actors or anything in the movie. It's been about the fact that it's NC-17. So, oh gosh, what is it that makes it NC-17? And like, boy, I guess that means it's going to be good. And it doesn't. I mean, it is definitely interesting what it could be that made the MPAA decide this is not a movie that should be seen at all. But like, that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean anything. It's literally just a stamp of disapproval from the American, like from American theaters. And like, the reason I bring that up, like it came up today with Blonde, but it comes up every couple of months with superhero movies. Like people will say, we need more R-rated superhero movies. And it's like, no, we need more good superhero movies. Like, Joker. I mean, I don't like Joker that much. I think it's fine, but I don't think it's very good. But like Joker, I guess like in some objective sense, Joker's not bad. There's a lot of good stuff in it, but the good stuff isn't there because it's rated R. Like the fact that Joker is rated R and one of my favorite movies, Logan, is rated R, those aren't the reasons they're good. They're good because they're good stories that were well adapted with like good actors playing characters that like they're clearly passionate about, and directors doing their job well. Well, not in the case of Joker, but in the case of Logan for sure. And like that's what we need more of when it comes to superhero movies is good superhero movies. A superhero movie can be good, or a movie in general can be good and be rated G. A movie can be bad and be rated R. The fact that Deadpool 3 might be rated PG-13 doesn't make a lot of sense with what you would normally want to do with that character, but that wouldn't mean that it would be bad. That's a contrived example. I'm pretty sure Disney has specifically said that Deadpool 3 will be rated R when it comes out, but it's like the MPAA rating of a movie doesn't matter. And I guess that's I'm pretty sure that most listeners of your podcast will be more or less on board with that opinion, but it's a thing that I see so often that I'm like, I don't know, it kind of needs to be said. And I hope that anyone who has that opinion, I hope that if there's anyone listening to this that does have that opinion, I have made them think about that a little more, because I also think that I'm probably not reaching the audience that needs to hear that with this.
Yeah, I agree, because, you know, when you're talking to movie buffs who, you know, a rating is literally a number or a letter next to a movie, where if you're going to see as much as you can regardless, it doesn't do anything to you. What I think is sort of an interesting conversation then becomes, what do we learn in advance when a rating is revealed? So, you know, you're talking about Deadpool, where we've come to sort of expect, you know, he's got a foul mouth. He's going to swear a lot. He's going to make sex jokes, potty jokes. There's going to be lewd gestures. There might be some nudity, things like that. So we have that idea in our head after the first two. And if we hear that, for whatever reason, they've decided to go with a PG-13 cut, you've sort of completely changed the way that this character's already been established and what have you. The flip side also being, if you hear Martin Scorsese is doing a new gangster movie and he's cast Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and whoever else you want to imagine, and Leonardo DiCaprio, and they're all in this big gangster epic movie, but the studio is demanding certain cuts, and so now it is going to be rated PG-13. I would then go, well, why is that? What is happening that this is happening? Because we're used to knowing that Scorsese deals a lot with violence, with swearing, with taboo subject matters and things like that. And if his movie is being rated PG-13, that means those elements aren't there. And when that's sort of the field that he normally works in, you sort of question why. And yeah, the interesting part with Blonde getting an NC-17 is so few movies get an NC-17 because it's basically the kiss of death. Luckily, because this is a Netflix movie, it doesn't matter, because in the United States, no big theater chain will show an NC-17 movie because they're too scared about showing it, worrying about who's going to come to see it. Whereas in Canada, because we have a slightly different rating system and how we grade things, an NC-17 movie in the US is just an R for us. So it's like, great, you're one of now 5 R-rated movies playing in the Cineplex this week. It makes no difference to us. But in the US, it's so taboo and so weird and so out there. And so I understand why the discourse is there. It's just like, I agree with you. It's just very funny why it's happening, and maybe not necessarily being talked about from the right angles.
That's exactly it. It's just the angle. The angle that I see is often we need more R-rated things because R-rated means good, and it doesn't. It's the things that often make those stories the ones we want to see. Like Logan is good for a lot of reasons. It's also very bloody, and like there's foul language in it. It's like a very bleak movie, and the ways in which it is bleak kind of necessitate for the MPAA that it would be rated R. And so it gets that R rating. It's not good because it's rated R. It's good, and also it's rated R. And yeah, the discourse around those ratings, like it is interesting what we can learn in advance of those, because you're right. If I hear that Martin Scorsese is making a movie and it's been rated PG, I'm like, what? But, you know, it's, basically, the thing that bothers me sometimes is when the rating is associated with a like when the rating angle is associated with this means good, this means bad. It's like, no, it means bloody, or it means sexual, or it means whatever. That is completely separate from quality.
Yeah, and I think to sort of tie it back to the Marvel sort of stuff, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness originally had a different director. Scott Derrickson, who did the first one, who had mostly done horror movies, was tasked with doing the second Doctor Strange, and he ended up leaving because, if I'm remembering correctly, he wanted to take the movie to be scarier than what it eventually ended up being. And Marvel and Disney weren't comfortable with that. And so he decided to leave on his own volition of, this is compromising my artistic vision. As someone who mostly deals in the horror realm, trying to make a Marvel movie horror is a bit of a tougher sell. Obviously, they brought in Sam Raimi, who has that ability to both A, direct horror movies, and B, direct big budget superhero movies, and sort of was able to combine them both. And I haven't seen it yet, so I can't really comment on the quality of it, but people seem to really be enjoying it. But yeah, I remember when they first announced it, they were announcing Multiverse of Madness as being a pure horror movie, which would have necessitated probably an R rating.
Yeah, and actually, you saying that does make me much more excited for Scott Derrickson's movie that's coming out next week called The Black Phone, which I fully intend to see as soon as I can. It's probably going to be in 3 weeks, but still. But yeah, I think without spoiling anything for you, because there is definitely a chance that you'll watch Doctor Strange sometime soon.
Yes.
I think that Sam Raimi he seems to know how to both do something that plays with his horror sensibilities and also that Marvel will sign off on, because he's able to get away with a lot, but like, you can see why he didn't get away with more.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I understand sort of why he was sort of brought in for this, because he is probably one of the very few people who are able to sort of straddle the horror / popcorn feature / comedy / action and sort of meld all those worlds together. It's a very tight rope to walk. Maybe someone like Edgar Wright, with his history of stuff like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, which both have horror elements. But then again, he was also supposed to direct the original Ant-Man, and he left due to creative differences too.
Watching the original Ant-Man was... I didn't hate the final product, but like, when you're watching that movie, I can't identify exactly what was Edgar Wright's and what was not. But there's a couple of spots in that movie where like there's a joke that's being set up, and when it's delivered, it just doesn't land. And I think like, I'll bet this was in the original script, and I'll bet that Edgar Wright knew exactly how to do it in his head, and he left before he got the chance. And then when I think Peyton Reed took over, he had the joke, he had the setup, but because he's not Edgar Wright and didn't write the joke, he couldn't deliver it as effectively as Edgar Wright would have.
That's a fascinating subject. I'm so glad that was what your hot take was, and I feel like that's something that's been percolating in my mind for a while, but I've never really had a chance to articulate it at all. So thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
But that wraps up our episode today. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. What have you been working on, and where can people find your show?
Okay, so when I finish talking here, I'm going to go back to editing our episode on of Kicking It with Kendrick, where we talk about A Simple Favor for damn near the length of the movie. It's a really good episode, but it's also one that I left to the last minute. But it's one because like it technically came out before this episode came out, so hopefully people have already heard it. Anyway, that's what I'm currently working on. We're getting close to the end of the current end of our series, Kicking It with Kendrick, over on Classic Movies Live, over on Spotify. So that will probably be wrapping up in July. And I'm very excited about how some of the episodes so far have turned out. Well, I mean, I like every episode of that, but I always kind of dread having to edit stuff because I just hate editing. But it's always so fun to like go back and edit those episodes, because I they're good discussions, and I like listening back to them. So I would definitely recommend those. And also on our main show, I'm not sure what the next movie we're talking about is, but we've been talking about basically all the big releases that have come out. We talked about Jurassic Park, which was actually, or Jurassic World Dominion, which is actually such a funny episode. Like I'm really excited about how that one turned out. I would definitely recommend that. And beyond that, I don't know. That's pretty much what I've got working on right now. I'm trying to come up with new show ideas, but I haven't got anything set in stone yet. But I really hope that this next year of Classic Movies Live is going to be a very fun one. I have some ideas that I've been sort of kicking around that I'm pretty excited about if I can get them off the ground.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next is, do you have any plans to follow up your Kicking It with Kendrick series with another long form series?
I think so. I might try to push the ideas that I've had recently have been long form, but I want to try and make it a little shorter because this was 30 episodes basically. And, I've enjoyed that, but like we planned this out in October and we couldn't do them all in a batch. So it ended up being, there were a lot of episodes that, I just said I loved every episode so far, but there's a lot of them where had we had more time to prepare and like had a little bit of a better idea of some of the stuff going in, I think we could have done them better, which I guess is probably going to be the case with every show we ever do. But like, I'm taking the lessons that we've learned from that and trying to work that towards something else. I do not know exactly what that something else is yet, but I want to make something a little bit shorter than 30 episodes. I have an idea for what would probably be like 5 episodes coming up at some point.
Interesting.
To run it by Pierre.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. Now, I know you did your previous long form series was Losing It with Leo about Leonardo DiCaprio movies. When Don't Look Up came out, you revitalized your Losing It with Leo brand. Is that going to be the case with both Leonardo DiCaprio and Anna Kendrick once you're done this series, that every once in a while you'll sort of bring those series back to cover their films again?
Yes, absolutely. Like I don't have direct dates for them yet, obviously, but we are absolutely planning on doing the movies Alice Darling and A Simple Favor 2 when those come out for Kicking It with Kendrick. And actually one of the things we had considered and are probably going to do, we just have to like have the time to devote to it, is we may be able to continue Losing It over Leo on this summer, because with Kicking It with Kendrick, we went through every single movie that Anna Kendrick's ever done. With Losing It over Leo, we had a different format to it, and that means there's a lot of movies we haven't talked about yet. So we need to kind of figure out exactly how to group those movies together, which I just haven't had the time to do recently. I actually have a preliminary version of that in a spreadsheet somewhere that I just have to find. But there's like probably 5 to 10 more movies, like 2 or 3 more life segments we can get to. It's just that these are no longer, Leo young, Leo middle-aged, Leo old. This is now like we have to find another connecting tissue between them.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair enough. Well, that's really cool.
Oh, I was going to say, we're going to talk about Don's Plum. Whatever the next, I don't know exactly what the theme is yet, but the very next episode of Losing It Over Leo will be Don's Plum.
Interesting. The mysterious movie that has so much intrigue about why it was hidden away.
Yeah, exactly. I'm expecting a Mark Pease Experience style movie.
Yes, I'm sure it's not going to be great. And sort of delves into maybe the more problematic era of Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
I will link to your show in the show notes and where people can follow that. Once again, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for letting me do one of these episodes. I think I told you off air, like, one of my personal goals was to be on this show enough that I could get a Better Know a Contributor episode. And
yep.
I definitely hope that if it's something he's open to and wants to do, and you end up having time, Pierre is also able to do that eventually. Though, like, you know, again, if the stars align and everyone is cool with it, I hope that he will get that chance.
Absolutely. I try to keep a minimum threshold of at least 3 appearances, so that way there's a bit of more of a history there between us.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I do want to eventually have Pierre on as well, because you're both have been so instrumental to this show's growth.
And I mean, I just hope that I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I'm very excited for whatever the next episode is that I get to be on, because I always love doing these guest spots. They're very different from my own show, obviously, and it's always a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to have you back. You can follow this show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Contra Zoom Pod, and let me know your thoughts on Jeff's favorite films and hot takes. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. Thanks for checking us out.
Directed by